This is Clayton Wilhelm's audience.
Over the years, there have been many different influential bands and artists who greatly impacted music. Artists like Miles Davis, who impacted jazz music, Bob Dylan, or even Jimi Hendrix, who is widely considered the greatest guitarist of all time. But who do you think is the most influential, greatest band of all time? Well, if you want to know Manny's answer to this question, all you have to do is one simple thing: Google it. If you were to search either one of these questions, the number one name of a band that would pop up are the Beatles. The Beatles started in 1957 in Liverpool, England, with the main band members being Paul McCartney and John Lennon. They first went under the name the Quarrymen, then the Silver Beatles, and then finally landed on the Beatles. Their schoolmates George Harrison, who played lead guitar, and Stuart Sutcliffe, who played band, later joined. Their buddy Pete Best also joined, playing drums. They played at many local gigs at pubs and bars, developing a small fan base. At one of their gigs, a record store manager, Brian Epstein, heard them play and fell in love with them. He became their band manager in 1961. When it became clear that the Beatles were getting serious about music, their bassist Stuart Sutcliffe left, and Paul McCartney took over bass. In 1962, the Beatles signed with Parlophone Records, and under producer George Martin, they began to record their first song, Love Me Do. However, George Martin did not like the drumming of drummer Pete Best. The Beatles fired Pete Best and hired Ringo Starr instead. The new lineup was Ringo Starr on drums, Paul McCartney on bass and vocals, John Lennon on guitar and vocals, and George Harrison on lead guitar. With this new lineup, would lead the Beatles into a decade of success unlike any band or artist has ever seen. They released their first album in 1963 called Please Please Me, with hit songs like Twist and Shout, Please Please Me, and Love Me Do. However, they did not become extremely famous in England until the release of their second album in November of '63. The album was called With the Beatles. This is when Beatlemania started. Beatlemania is used to describe their crazy fans who shouted so loud at their concerts that the Beatles could not even hear themselves play. Beatlemania had not yet crossed to the US, however, until December of '63, when Capitol Records released I Want to Hold Your Hand in the US. It became clear that a British invasion of music had started in the US when the Beatles went on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964 and played in front of 74 million US fans. That accounts for about 40% of the US population that tuned in to watch on television. This is according to 10 facts you didn't know about the Beatles. They then released their third studio album called A Hard Day's Night, which was the soundtrack to their first of 3 movies. While touring on this album, they refused to play a show in Florida because they heard that the crowd would be segregated. Because of this pressure, the crowd was integrated. Throughout the whole Beatles' career, they did not play in front of one segregated crowd. They toured heavily on their 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th studio albums, which were released between December of '64 and August of '66. But they became tired as they played over 1,000 shows and their screaming fans screamed so loud that they could not even hear themselves play. So from that point on, they decided to become a studio band. They released their 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th albums without touring on them. This caused a lot of tension in the band, and although those albums were extremely successful, by their 12th album, they didn't even record the whole album together. They would just come in, record their parts, and go on their separate ways. John Lennon was the first to announce to the band that he was leaving, and on January 3rd, 1969, they played their famous rooftop concert, which was to be their last. And on April 10th, they officially announced the end of the Beatles. By the end of the Beatles' run, they had recorded 20 number 1 hit songs, which is 10 more than the next closest artist. They also recorded 34 top 10 hit songs. And at one point in April of '64, they had 14 songs on the Billboard Hot 100 and occupied the top 5 spots. They're the only band ever to do this. What is so impressive about the Beatles is that they thrived in many different genres. In fact, they are often credited for creating the metal genre with Paul McCartney's song, Helter Skelter. They also had 3 different artists in their band with Paul McCartney, John Lennon, and George Harrison, who wrote and recorded a top 3 hit song. Now you'll know a little bit more about the Beatles, and hopefully understand why many people consider them the greatest band of all time.
Hey, very good. Hey.